Nobody lived in the graveyard but the dead and the boy. He didn't mind, the silence suited him. It always had. The boy, whose name was Silas, was no more than 6 when his parents brought him to live with his grandfather. His grandfather, a withered but strong man named Silas too, was the caretaker. The old man's face, a roadmap of wrinkles, softened when he saw the boy. He knew, without a word spoken, that this was his new charge. The graveyard became Silas's world. He knew every headstone, every mausoleum, every gnarled tree that clawed at the moon. He played among the graves, their cold marble a comfort against his skin. The boy never found it eerie or strange. These were his neighbors, silent and still, but present nonetheless. He felt closer to them than to any living soul in the bustling town beyond the rusted gates. Silas spent his days helping his grandfather tend to the grounds. He clipped overgrown ivy, swept fallen leaves, and polished the granite headstones until they gleamed in the afternoon sun. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the graveyard, a different kind of work began. The whispers started then, barely audible at first, then growing louder as darkness consumed the graveyard. At night, Silas would sit with his grandfather by the flickering lantern light. The old man would tell him stories, not fairy tales, but true stories. Stories of the people buried beneath their feet. He spoke of their lives, their loves, their losses. He spoke of the day they arrived at his doorstep, cold and still. Each tale ended the same way. "They're at peace now," his grandfather would say, his voice a low rumble. "They're home." Silas, even at a young age, understood. He could feel the presence of the departed all around him. They weren't frightening, these whispers in the dark. They were simply lonely. And in their loneliness, Silas found a strange sort of companionship. As Silas grew older, the whispers grew stronger. They swirled around him, sometimes forming words he could almost understand. He learned to distinguish his parents' voices from the others. They were always the closest, the most insistent. They visited him most nights, their spectral forms hovering at the edge of his vision. He could never quite make out their features, only the vague outlines of their forms, shimmering like heat haze. "Our darling boy," his mother would whisper, her voice a mournful sigh. "We miss you," his father would add, the words laced with a sorrow that chilled Silas to the bone. "I miss you too," Silas would whisper back, his voice barely audible even to himself. He would tell them about his day, about the book he was reading, about the robin he had seen building a nest in the old oak tree. He knew they couldn't truly interact with him, not in the way the living could, but it comforted him to pretend, to imagine that they were listening, that they were still a part of his life. One night, his grandfather found him talking to the empty air. The old man didn't scold him. Instead, he placed a rough hand on Silas's shoulder, his touch surprisingly strong. "They mean you no harm," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "They just miss you is all." His grandfather taught him how to listen to the whispers, how to decipher their meaning. He taught him about the delicate balance between the world of the living and the world of the dead, a balance that must be maintained. The graveyard was a sacred place, a liminal space where the veil between worlds thinned. It was a place of peace, but also a place of power where the echoes of the past lingered like smoke. One particularly cold autumn night, a change swept through the graveyard. The whispers, once mournful and subdued, became agitated, almost angry. The air grew heavy, charged with a strange energy that made the hairs on Silas's arms stand on end. He could feel his grandfather's unease too. The old man's hand trembled as he lit the lanterns, his face drawn and pale. "They're restless tonight," he muttered, his eyes scanning the encroaching darkness. "Something's disturbed them." That night, for the first time, his grandfather introduced him to the secret of the salt. He handed Silas a small leather pouch, its surface worn smooth with age. "Keep this with you, boy," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Always. It'll keep you safe." Silas looked up at his grandfather, his brow furrowed in confusion. Safe from what? The old man hesitated, then sighed. "There are things in this world, Silas, that don't belong, things that linger long after they should be gone. The salt will keep them at bay." He showed Silas how to sprinkle a circle of salt around himself before he slept. The salt, he explained, was a barrier, a line the dead couldn't cross. It was a simple ritual, but it filled Silas with a sense of security he hadn't realized he was missing. That night, as he lay in his bed, the whispers swirling around him like angry wasps, Silas clutched the leather pouch tightly. The salt felt warm against his skin, a comforting weight. He closed his eyes, taking comfort in the knowledge that he was protected. The salt wouldn't bring his parents back, but it would keep him safe from the things that lurked in the shadows, the things that even the dead feared.